Welcome to the most dramatic and hilarious video of the week. Have you ever imagined a scenario where Donald Trump is no longer the president, but instead becomes a construction worker? That's right. Today, we'll explore what would happen if Trump became a worker while continuing the high taxes policy he implemented during his presidency. Can he still be a worker, or will he just drown everyone in a sea of taxes? It's bound to be a surprising, hilarious, and satirical event. First of all, you need to understand that Trump is not the type of person who changes easily. Even though he's no longer sitting in the Oval Office, one thing hasn't changed: his tax policy. And if you think that just because he's a worker now, he'll stop raising taxes, you'd be wrong. He won't just be a worker, he'll apply high tax policies to make sure that even people who aren't presidents can feel the power of taxes. Imagine one day, Trump wakes up at 6 a.m., gets dressed in his worker's gear, puts on his helmet, and heads to the construction site. But instead of focusing on his work, he thinks, can I add an extra 10% tax on these construction tools? This shows that Trump isn't just a worker, he's a super tax worker, ready to raise taxes even on the smallest nails. Now, after putting on his orange work gear, Trump steps onto the construction site. He looks at the hammer and wonders, can I use this to fix the economy? Little does he know, not every hammer strike can make the economy stronger. Every time he lifts the hammer, he thinks about raising taxes. The hammer doesn't just hit wood, it hits the workers around him. Then, Trump gets to work. Every time he strikes the hammer, the workers exchange worried glances. He's definitely going to raise taxes again, they think to themselves. But that's Trump's policy: when he doesn't know what to do, he instantly thinks, raise taxes. Even while working on a construction site, he's always thinking about raising taxes, because in his mind, that's the only way to make America great again. He thinks raising taxes will boost the economy, but doesn't realize he's making things harder for everyone. Picture this: Trump holds the hammer and says, everything will get better if I raise taxes just a little bit more. But when he tries to drive a nail into the wood, the nail flies out, and no one can explain why. It's just like his tax policies, they never quite fit and always cause problems. And even though the workers tell him, Mr. Trump, can you stop and actually work for a bit, he keeps hammering away, but instead of fixing anything, he's just making it all more chaotic. The funny part is, Trump can't understand why people aren't happy when he raises taxes. To him, all he needs to do is add a little more tax with every hammer strike, and then, like magic, the economy will flourish. But in reality, it's the complete opposite. The workers start sighing and looking at their watches, just wishing he'd put down the hammer and think about something more practical, like reducing taxes to ease the burden on them. At this point, Trump feels like a hero, doing the job that the world needs. But in reality, he's just like a construction worker trying to build a house by constantly messing around with taxes without ever getting to the core of the issue. Now, at this point, Trump has fully embraced the role of a worker. He's working hard, or at least, he thinks he is, while the other workers look at him with disappointment. An 8-hour workday, but instead of focusing on his work, Trump is worrying about how taxes might affect the economy, and whether he can raise taxes a little more. Just keep working, everyone. Don't worry about the high taxes. Trump says, but everyone knows that if taxes keep going up, the cost of living will skyrocket, and that doesn't help the workers at all. He keeps believing that raising taxes will make the economy stronger, without realizing that it's the workers, the ones working hard every day, who are actually creating value. His decisions just make them feel like they're being crushed under the weight of taxes. Imagine this: if you're a worker, sweating it out in the heat, covered in dust, and dealing with the constant noise of construction, how would you feel knowing that your taxes are going up while your wages stay the same? Clearly, you can't just rely on a tax policy to save the economy. Trump doesn't get that workers don't need more taxes, they need a fair working environment, reasonable wages, and proper policies. Trump tries to explain to everyone that, if we raise taxes more, companies will reinvest in our country. But the workers can only shake their heads and laugh. They're so tired of putting up with his decisions. They don't care what he thinks about taxes anymore, they just want enough money to pay for utilities and daily living expenses. While Trump continues to praise his great tax strategy, the workers begin organizing protests. They don't just want lower taxes, they want relief from the stress and hardship at work. No one wants to keep working under a boss who thinks raising taxes is the only solution. Now, the life of the workers is not just about hard labor anymore, it's become a battle against Trump's tax policies. The workers begin reacting strongly. They can't keep working in an environment where taxes keep rising, the cost of living keeps going up, and their wages stay the same. At first, only a few workers complain, but more and more join in the protest. Soon, slogans begin to appear: "No money for pizza," and "Taxes higher than wages." These banners start popping up all around the site, and no one can ignore them. Trump stands in the middle of the site, watching the workers gather and sighing. He wonders, am I doing the right thing? But no, he doesn't realize that instead of helping the workers, his tax policies are driving them to the breaking point. The workers aren't just protesting the tax hikes, they're also fed up with Trump's endless tax theories. They don't want to hear another word about raising taxes as the only way to boost the economy. They're already tired. One of the workers speaks up: "Trump, you don't work like we do. You don't know what it's like for us. We need a living wage, not more taxes every day." And then, they all start rallying together. They stand up, protest, and demand change. This turns into a full-blown tax revolution. The workers don't just stop at complaining, they organize protests, they write petitions demanding that Trump change his policies or leave the construction site. Meanwhile, Trump, still clueless, stubbornly clings to his ideas. Just a little more, everything will change. He always says, but no one believes him anymore. And so, Trump finally realizes that not everyone agrees with his policies. The workers don't want more taxes, they want a better life. But instead of listening and changing, Trump keeps pushing his high tax policies, thinking they're the only way to make the American economy stronger. And the more workers protest, the more isolated he feels in this tax war. Finally, Trump is forced to face the truth: a tax strategy is not the answer to all the problems. But will he change his policies? The answer is, definitely not. Trump is not someone who changes easily, and for him, high taxes will always be the only solution. In this part, we'll look at the consequences of Trump's tax policies. Imagine this: Trump, still firmly holding onto his decision to raise taxes, stands in the middle of the construction site. But what happens when the big companies begin to feel the pressure of the rising taxes? Trump might not realize it, but the truth is, the companies are starting to feel suffocated by the exorbitant tax rates. So, what do? They start pulling out. Big companies begin moving their production to other countries where taxes are lower, and labor costs are cheaper. And the result? American workers lose their jobs. Trump has no idea that his tax policies are pushing companies further away. These companies are looking for ways to move to countries with a more favorable tax environment, while American workers are left behind. And even though Trump keeps saying, high taxes will bring jobs back to America, the reality is that his policies are only making everything worse. The reality is, the workers that Trump is trying to protect are now being pushed into unemployment by the very same tax policies he's enforcing. The companies can't survive with such high taxes, so they pack up and go to places where the tax environment is friendlier. Meanwhile, American workers are just sitting there, helpless, with no other options. Trump, while trying to save the economy, is actually the one driving both companies and workers into a crisis. He continues to stand firm on his policies, despite the ever-worsening consequences. And as more and more workers lose their jobs, Trump keeps arguing that it's because the companies aren't investing in America. But is anyone really listening to him? Does he realize that he's doing the opposite of what he intends? Trump is so wrapped up in his beliefs that he can't even see that his actions are directly causing the problem. The more he refuses to listen, the more the problem spirals out of control, and the further the companies move abroad, leaving American workers out of work and without hope. Meanwhile, Trump still clings to his high tax policies as if they are the holy grail of economic recovery. After a long period of facing undeniable reality, Trump starts to realize one thing: raising taxes is not the answer to everything. Yes, you heard that right. After months of hammering, raising taxes, and lecturing workers, he finally starts to see that, maybe, only the workers truly understand the struggles of working under high taxes. But don't think for a second that Trump will change immediately. No, he still tries to find a way to justify himself, like a child who never wants to admit they were wrong. Trump stands in the middle of the construction site, looking around, and asks himself, maybe I'm still right. If I raise taxes a little more, maybe everything will be fine. But the workers around him can only exchange looks of pure disappointment. They don't trust his explanations anymore. And who could blame them? A person who works in construction and still imposes sky-high taxes. Who can tolerate that? With each passing day, the workers' patience wears thinner. While Trump stands there, still swinging his hammer like he's working at a tax policy factory, the workers are growing more and more exhausted. Exhausted from dealing with the decisions of a boss they just can't understand. "I'm a worker, I'm not a pawn in your political game," one worker says. Surely, Trump can't continue this for much longer. No matter how many lessons about taxes he's learned, he simply can't change an economy he clearly doesn't understand. Trump finally realizes that his decisions have made things worse for the very people he once wanted to protect. But sadly, he's unwilling to change. Trump has never been one to evolve, and it's clear he won't start now, even when faced with undeniable evidence. And then, one day, Trump starts to look at everything from a different perspective. Not because he's changed his tax policies, but because he starts to see his own isolation. When the workers no longer even want to listen to him, when he realizes he's been isolated, that's when it really starts to dawn on him. But this awakening comes too late. All he's done is stir frustration and dissatisfaction among the workers and the American labor force. So now, Trump begins thinking about a solution. After being isolated and criticized by the workers, he decides, all right, maybe I need to do something different. But does he change his tax policy? The answer is, nope. Nothing changes, except that he now tries to come up with another way to justify raising taxes even more. With a smug smile, Trump stands before the workers and proposes his solution. "We're going to have a new tax strategy, everything will be fine, don't worry," he says, while everyone just stares at him blankly. The workers are so tired of his empty promises. They just want one thing, a fair, reasonable tax policy, not more taxes crammed into every corner of the economy. But Trump still doesn't get it. To him, every problem can be solved with just a little more tax, and of course, when he says, just a little more tax is good for the economy, the workers can only smile sadly. Why? Because every time he says that, they have to grit their teeth and endure another round of taxes without seeing any real benefits. And then, Trump doesn't realize that his stubbornness has caused him to lose the trust of the very workers he once promised to protect. As he continues to hold firm to his tax policy, the workers feel even more abandoned than ever. This lack of change slowly turns him into a symbol of failure, even though he doesn't see it. So, the solution Trump proposes is just another plan. But it's not the solution the workers need. They need real change, a real shift in how taxes and labor are viewed, not just another failed policy being pushed forward. So, after everything that has happened, Trump still gets rewarded. But the real question is, does he really deserve that reward? Let's not forget, Trump is no ordinary worker. He still carries the ego of a boss, and when things don't go as planned, he thinks, I'm definitely going to get rewarded for my tireless efforts. However, the reward Trump receives is a giant stack of tax papers. Imagine a worker getting rewarded with higher taxes while they're struggling to make ends meet. This reward doesn't do anything for the workers who are already enduring a harder life due to Trump's disastrous decisions. While Trump thinks he's doing the right thing, the workers think the complete opposite. His promises of a stronger economy have turned into empty words. Workers can't eat taxes, they can't live on promises. What they need is steady work, fair pay, and better working conditions, not more and more taxes piling up. So Trump, with his smug, self-satisfied grin, accepts this reward and thinks he's doing the right thing. But in the eyes of the workers, it's just a cruel joke. He gets recognition but doesn't realize that, in reality, he's just making everything worse. No one wants to reward someone who is making their life more difficult. And so, when everything is said and done, Trump still doesn't understand that his stubbornness has caused him to lose the trust of the very workers he once claimed to protect. So, as Trump continues to stick to his tax policies, one thing becomes inevitable: he begins to get isolated. And not just isolated in his job, but isolated in the very construction site where he thinks he's doing well. The workers around him start shaking their heads and exchanging looks of annoyance every time Trump walks by. They not only don't want to work with him, but they also don't want to hear any more of his tax policy explanations. Conversations around the construction site are no longer about the work at hand, but about Trump's increasing tax hikes. Is he going to raise taxes again? How much more will he increase this time? They joke. The company moved overseas, why doesn't he just lower taxes to keep them here? One worker even blurts out something that makes everyone stop and stare. Does he think he's some sort of god? Trump, with his unshakable nature, still believes that everything will be fine if he can convince everyone that high taxes are the best way to grow the economy. But instead of being recognized, he's now being isolated. The workers no longer believe his promises. They can see that his tax explanations are just a show he keeps trying to repeat. Of course, for Trump, being isolated and condemned is a tough pill to swallow. He's not used to being opposed, especially by those he once thought he was helping. But the workers are different. They don't have time for lofty tax theories and high tax policies. All they want is steady work, fair wages, and a reasonable policy, not a tax burden crushing them every day. And then, the workers start doing something Trump never expected. They come together to condemn his tax policies, and they even begin organizing strikes to protest. This has gone too far. They're tired of not only the work but also tired of Trump forcing unrealistic policies on them. At this point, Trump sees himself as an outsider. He thinks he's working hard, but he realizes that no one cares about his tax theories anymore. He goes from being the leader to being the one criticized and shunned. This must be a shock to someone who's used to being in power and admired. But will Trump change? Will he realize that his persistence isn't the only way to solve the problem? The answer is, probably not. He keeps insisting that he's doing the right thing. But the more he explains, the more isolated he becomes. And the workers can only shake their heads in disappointment and walk away. Finally, when things have gotten completely out of hand, Trump can't avoid the truth any longer. His tax policy has made everything so chaotic that it's beyond repair. And so, the inevitable happens. Trump gets fired. Not because he wasn't working, but because he was working the wrong way. His wrong decisions not only affected the economy, but they also directly impacted the lives of the workers. This moment is definitely one for the books in Trump's life. He stands in the office, hearing the manager say, "We can't keep working with you. Your tax policies are making everything worse. We need to cut costs, and that's not possible while you're imposing these high taxes." Yep, he got fired, not for not working hard, but because of his disastrous political decisions. This is a huge shock for Trump, but in reality, he totally deserves it. The price of his political stubbornness has cost him not just his job but also the trust of the very people he wanted to protect. Companies no longer want to work with him, workers no longer trust him, and now he's facing the consequences of his disastrous tax policies. With a look of utter disbelief and confusion, Trump stands, watching the empty construction site, with no workers around. The companies no longer accept him, and the government doesn't want to hear him. He stands there, quietly realizing that maybe he was wrong. But someone like Trump will never admit he was wrong. Instead, he just stands there, sighs, and thinks about what he's lost. So, a wealthy boss gets the fate of a jobless worker because he couldn't adapt and couldn't see that sometimes, a fair tax policy is exactly what the workers need, not just high tax theories. So, after everything, Trump has learned a big lesson, and maybe he's realized that sometimes, the people he thought he was protecting are the ones who can help him change. But will he really learn anything from this failure? Will he keep pursuing his tax policies, or will there be a turning point in his perspective and reforms? We can't say for sure. But one thing we can say for certain is that whether Trump is a worker or not, he'll always find a way to raise taxes, even if he faces opposition, isolation, or even gets fired. One thing's undeniable, he'll always stick to his determination, or rather, his persistence in making everything more expensive. So, what do you think? Can Trump change and do better, or will he continue sinking deeper into his mistakes? Share your thoughts in the comments below this video. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for more hilarious and satirical videos from us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.